The 80s gave us a Saturday morning dream world, filled with neon colors, wild ideas, and unforgettable characters. But hidden beneath the nostalgia sit 20 cartoons that pushed boundaries so far they would never survive in today's cautious world. These shows mix danger, intensity, fear, and themes far beyond what networks allow now. Today we count down the forgotten 80s cartoons that would get pulled off air instantly. Number 20. The Punky Brewster Cartoon, 1985. The Punky Brewster cartoon looked harmless on the surface, yet its episodes often wandered into territory that would shock modern censors. The show followed Punky and her magical companion Glomer, a fuzzy creature with unpredictable powers. What began as lighthearted fantasy quickly evolved into storylines involving fear transformations and surreal danger. Many episodes placed Punky in heightened peril, including supernatural threats that went far beyond standard children's animation. One episode famously trapped the children inside a nightmare realm filled with monsters and unsettling visuals that pushed the boundaries of what Saturday morning television considered acceptable. Glomer's chaotic abilities often created hazardous situations that no network would greenlight for young audiences today. Modern standards also frown upon depictions of children repeatedly endangered through magical accidents, especially when those scenes depict emotional distress. Despite these issues, the cartoon remains fascinating for its bold willingness to unsettle and experiment. It showed a strange, fearless side of 80s animation, where anything could happen, and often did. Today, it survives mostly in fan memories, a show too odd, intense and unpredictable for current children's programming rules. Number 19. The Ewoks, 1985. The Ewoks cartoon may look whimsical, but beneath its soft exterior lived surprisingly dark themes. Based on the beloved creatures from Star Wars, the show ventured into magic warfare, tribal conflict, and existential threats that would raise eyebrows on modern networks. Episodes routinely placed the Ewoks in life-threatening danger, featuring monsters, curses, and ancient forces that wanted to destroy their world completely. Some storylines dealt with fear, loss, and sacrifice, portraying stakes far more intense than the average kids' show of the era. Certain villains were designed with eerie, grotesque appearances that would be considered too frightening for young viewers today. The series also explored moral dilemmas involving loyalty and betrayal, adding layers of seriousness rarely found in modern preschool-friendly franchises. The violence in Ewoks was softened but undeniably present, as characters fought off terrifying beasts or engaged in mystical battles. These elements, combined with dark fantasy imagery, would push the limits for today's children's networks, which heavily regulate tone, danger, and emotional intensity. Even so, Ewoks holds a unique place in the 80s animation landscape, blending heartfelt charm with unsettling peril. It stands as a relic from a time when children's adventure cartoons dared to tread into truly intimidating territory, long before content guidelines tightened. Number 18. Denver the Last Dinosaur, 1988. Denver the Last Dinosaur appears sweet at first glance, yet its themes and tone would face heavy scrutiny today. On the surface, it told the story of a group of teenagers who discover the last living dinosaur and attempt to protect him. But the show often wove in surprisingly mature issues including exploitation, kidnapping, and environmental destruction. Villains relentlessly hunted Denver to profit from him, depicting greed and corporate cruelty in ways that modern kids' programming rarely touches. Some plots showed Denver being caged, threatened, or nearly shipped across the world for sinister purposes. The emotional distress placed upon both Denver and the kids would be seen as too intense for today's broadcast standards, especially for younger audiences. Another point of controversy lies in its depiction of teens navigating dangerous adult situations. The characters frequently faced real-world threats from irresponsible adults and criminals. Modern networks prefer to keep child characters far removed from such grounded peril. Denver himself often reacted with fear or anxiety, adding an emotional weight uncommon in current children's shows. Despite the risks, Denver the Last Dinosaur remains remembered for its strong anti-exploitation message and its mix of innocence and danger. But its tone would likely get it pulled off air today, for pushing far beyond safe boundaries. Number 17. The Get Along Gang, 1984. The Get Along Gang might seem like the safest cartoon imaginable, yet several episodes revealed undertones that would concern today's broadcasters. Designed to teach moral lessons, the show followed anthropomorphic animal children living in a picture-perfect town. However, the conflicts often escalated into morally heavy territory, with themes involving bullying, manipulation, and emotional harm. Certain episodes featured characters experiencing isolation, shame, or harsh peer pressure that created distressing atmospheres far beyond what preschool-oriented programming allows now. The villains of the series, such as Catchem Crocodile and Leland Lizard, were depicted as scheming intimidators, whose actions bordered on psychological cruelty. Scenes where they tormented the heroes would be judged too harsh for modern young audiences. Additionally, the show sometimes portrayed punishment, humiliation, and fear as consequences, which modern standards avoid due to their potential negative emotional impact. Even well-intentioned moral lessons frequently unfolded through scenarios that today's networks consider too intense or unsettling for children. Despite its warm aesthetic, the Get Along Gang stands as a reminder that even gentle 80s cartoons sometimes strayed into darker emotional territory. Its portrayal of childhood conflict would likely get the show removed from schedules under today's sensitive guidelines. Number 16. The Snorks, 1984. The Snorks seems bright, cheerful, and harmless. Yet beneath the colorful underwater world lay storylines that would raise concerns today. Episodes frequently involved dangerous creatures, environmental collapse, and social conflict, mirroring real-world anxieties that networks now avoid in younger programming. Characters often faced peril, ranging from sea monsters to natural disasters, creating tension that would exceed acceptable limits for preschool audiences. Several plots addressed inequality, prejudice, and corruption within Snork society, presenting surprisingly adult themes. While the show aimed to teach lessons, these topics introduced darker emotional layers. Scenes involving fear, entrapment, or physical danger happened regularly, especially in storylines where villains threatened entire communities. Modern standards for children's animation emphasize comfort, safety, and minimal emotional distress. The Snorks often depicted characters crying, panicking, or confronting overwhelming threats. These moments, though dramatically effective, would make today's broadcasters hesitant to air the series without major alterations. Even so, The Snorks remains loved for its creativity and charm. But its willingness to explore fear, conflict, and societal issues places it firmly among the 80s cartoons that would likely be pulled off air today. Number 15. Bionic 6, 1987. Bionic 6 delivered superhero adventure mixed with surprisingly dark undertones that would challenge modern broadcast rules. The series followed a family enhanced with bionic powers after a near-fatal accident, an origin far more traumatic than what networks allow today. The transformation scenes carried strong emotional weight, highlighting pain, loss, and responsibility themes that pushed beyond safe children's storytelling. Episodes frequently depicted realistic danger, as the family fought villains who used biological weapons, psychological manipulation, and energy-based attacks capable of mass destruction. The show did not shy away from showing the physical and emotional toll of battle, sometimes leaving heroes injured, exhausted, or shaken. Current standards for children's programming avoid lingering on suffering, especially when family members face repeated life-threatening peril together. The antagonists added further intensity. Dr. Scarab and his mutated henchmen often engaged in actions bordering on body horror, featuring twisted experiments and grotesque transformations that would be deemed too disturbing today. The show also tackled philosophical questions about identity, free will, and technology gone wrong, inviting a depth of seriousness networks now reserve for older audiences. Despite its groundbreaking creativity, Bionic 6 pushed emotional and visual boundaries that would likely get it removed from a modern schedule. Yet its bold storytelling remains admired by 80s animation fans. Number 14. The Sector's Warriors of Symbion, 1985. Sector's Warriors of Symbion embrace dark fantasy so heavily that it remains one of the most intense children's shows ever aired. The series took place in a world where humanoid warriors bonded with giant insect creatures, creating a setting filled with eerie visuals and unsettling biological designs. Many characters appeared fused with their mounts in ways that would spark immediate concern among today's child safety regulators. The battles in sectors were portrayed with gritty seriousness, often involving energy weapons, close combat, and large-scale destruction. The villains included monstrous insect abominations, whose horrifying appearances would be judged far too frightening for modern young viewers. Entire cities fell to corruption plagues or swarms, presenting apocalyptic imagery rarely seen in kids' animation. Themes of mutation, infection, and environmental collapse appeared frequently, adding layers of darkness to what was marketed as a toy tie-in. Networks today avoid fantasy violence that feels too realistic or emotionally heavy. Sectors routinely cross that line with sequences depicting fear, desperation, and irreversible consequences. While visually stunning and wildly imaginative, Sector's Warriors of Symbion would never reach air today without massive censorship. Its grim tone and monstrous designs embody the fearless excess of 80s action cartoons. Number 13. Spiral Zone, 1987. Spiral Zone stands as one of the bleakest cartoons of its decade, presenting a dystopian world where most of the planet is enslaved by a mind-altering infection. The imagery alone would keep it off air today. Civilians trapped in the spiral zone moved slowly, with glowing red eyes, creating visuals far too disturbing for children's networks under current standards. The show focused on a small resistance team fighting Dr. Bent and his bioengineered horrors. Episodes portrayed society on the brink of collapse, with cities deserted, contaminated or overtaken by monstrous technology. The themes of psychological control, biological warfare, and societal decay extended far beyond what modern networks consider child-appropriate. Spiral Zone delivered intense action scenes with weapons, military tactics, and constant danger. Characters regularly faced infection which threatened to transform them into mindless slaves of the enemy. The body horror element alone would disqualify it from today's programming. Emotional weight was also heavy, as characters confronted despair, isolation, and the possibility of losing everything. Although Spiral Zone is praised for its ambition and world-building, it remains a perfect example of 80s animation that dared to push too far. Today, it would be pulled instantly for intensity and frightening imagery. Number 12. The Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers, 1986. The Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers blended Western energy with sci-fi darkness, resulting in a show both thrilling and surprisingly mature. The series followed law enforcement officers, enhanced with experimental technology, often depicted as dangerous, unpredictable, and psychologically taxing. Scenes of power overloads, emotional strain, and physical collapse appeared throughout the series, and would alarm networks today. The villains delivered even deeper intensity. Alien marauders, artificial intelligences, and supernatural entities sought to conquer, enslave, or annihilate entire civilizations. Some episodes portrayed the Rangers battling threats with horror-inspired designs, such as skeletal robots, parasitic lifeforms, or creatures that fed on fear. These visuals would be too extreme for current children's programming guidelines. Themes of loss, sacrifice, and moral conflict played major roles in the show. Characters frequently questioned their duty, struggling with trauma or guilt in emotionally heavy scenes. The stakes were life and death, in almost every episode contrasting sharply with today's lighter, more sanitized animated adventures. Though celebrated by fans for its intelligence and boldness, Galaxy Rangers would face immediate censorship today. Its mature storytelling and frightening imagery push it into territory networks no longer accept for young viewers. Number 11. Brave Star, 1987. Brave Star mixed space Western adventure with emotional depth and startlingly dark subject matter. While marketed to children, it confronted issues rarely addressed in animation, including addiction, irresponsible gun use, and personal responsibility. The infamous episode dealing with substance abuse remains one of the most intense morality tales ever aired for kids, and would certainly be pulled off air today. Violence in Brave Star also carried emotional weight. Characters faced real physical danger from bandits, mutants, and supernatural beings. Some episodes depicted death or irreversible consequences which modern children's networks avoid entirely. The villains often possessed frightening designs, pushing the boundaries of what young audiences could comfortably handle. The world of New Texas was harsh, unpredictable, and filled with lawlessness, echoing real-world frontier struggles. Brave Star often portrayed moral dilemmas involving community loyalty and justice in ways far too serious for current broadcast expectations. Even the hero's powers, like Eyes of the Hawk or Strength of the Bear, were presented in tense, high-stakes conflicts. Brave Star remains admired for its courage and storytelling ambition. But its darker themes, intensity, and emotional realism would force networks to remove it instantly today. Number 10. Robotics, 1985. Robotics delivered one of the most intense sci-fi storylines ever marketed to children. Set in a universe where human astronauts become trapped in a deadly war between gigantic robotic civilizations, the show presented moral dilemmas and violence far beyond what any network would allow today. Entire planets faced destruction. Cities collapsed. Heroes struggled with the psychological strain of survival. These themes would trigger instant removal under modern guidelines. The robotics themselves were towering mechanical warriors, whose battles caused catastrophic damage. Explosions, falling structures, and large-scale warfare dominated the series, turning every episode into a high-tension struggle. Current children's programming avoids realistic violence or scenes that imply large-scale loss and destruction, but robotics portrayed such chaos regularly. The emotional intensity also stood out. Characters confronted fear, hopelessness, and the constant threat of death. Scenes where human pilots merged with massive robotic bodies added an unsettling element of identity conflict. The villains often showed no mercy, heightening the sense of danger in every confrontation. Despite its impressive animation and ambitious storytelling, robotics was far too dark for its young target audience. Today, it would be pulled from schedules due to aggression, emotional heaviness, and catastrophic imagery that exceed modern safety standards. Number 9. The Centurions, 1986. The Centurions told the story of elite soldiers using high-tech exosuits to battle global threats. While visually thrilling, the show's militaristic tone-heavy weaponry and intense combat would be unacceptable for children's networks today. The heroes used lasers, missiles, and full-scale military hardware in battles that often resembled real warfare rather than fantasy action. Episodes featured terrorists, mutant creatures, and rogue machines launching attacks on cities worldwide. These scenarios mirrored real-world fears involving national security and urban destruction themes networks avoid for young viewers. The villains showed relentless aggression, putting civilians and entire nations in danger. Scenes involving hostage situations or mass devastation would be considered too intense for modern broadcast standards. Even the transformation sequences were dramatic, showing characters physically locking into armored suits that represented a fusion of man and machine. This intense process, along with the constant threat of injury, created an atmosphere of tension few modern cartoons would allow. Emotional stakes were high, as the heroes repeatedly risked their lives in combat situations, portrayed with surprising seriousness. The Centurions remains an iconic piece of 80s action animation, but its military realism, dark tone, and large-scale violence would guarantee its removal from today's children's programming. Number 8. The Inhumanoids, 1986. The Inhumanoids stands as perhaps the darkest children's cartoon ever broadcast. Featuring monstrous subterranean beasts with grotesque designs, the show pushed horror to extremes, unimaginable for modern kids' television. The villains were nightmarish creatures who ripped through cities, spread toxic corruption, and sought the destruction of humanity itself. Modern networks would never allow such terrifying imagery for young audiences. The show frequently depicted humans being captured, mutated, or psychologically tormented by monstrous forces. Certain scenes involved skeletons melting flesh, distorted faces, and horrifying transformations. These visuals skirted the edges of horror animation, making the Inhumanoids a show that would be pulled off air instantly today. The plotlines were equally intense. Environmental collapse, political conspiracies, and biological contamination appeared across multiple episodes. The Earth Core heroes often faced overwhelming threats with genuine fear, exhaustion, or trauma-echoing themes found in adult science fiction, rather than children's adventure. Even the moral lessons were heavy, emphasizing the cost of corruption, greed, and unethical science. The series dealt directly with consequences rarely shown in kids' media, including irreversible disaster. Despite its creativity, the Inhumanoids crossed far beyond any acceptable boundary for children's programming and would never be approved today. Number 7. The Raccoons, 1985. The Raccoons appears gentle at first, yet beneath its friendly exterior, the show tackled themes heavier than most children's cartoons dare approach today. The series followed Bert, Ralph, and Melissa as they attempted to stop Cyril Sneer, a ruthless industrialist whose greed threatened their forest home. Environmental destruction, corporate abuse, and moral decay formed the backbone of many episodes, creating narratives far darker than their visual style suggested. Cyril Sneer regularly engaged in schemes involving pollution, deforestation, and financial manipulation, all presented with real-world consequences. Scenes depicting dying forests, collapsing habitats, or terrified animals carried an emotional weight modern networks avoid for young audiences. Episodes often forced characters to confront hopelessness or the loss of their home, concepts that would be deemed too intense today. The tone could shift dramatically, from lighthearted to serious. Certain episodes dealt with themes of betrayal, anxiety, and economic hardship, touching on issues rarely addressed in modern children's animation. Even the villains' moments of vulnerability added mature layers that current broadcasters might reject for being emotionally complex. Though beloved, the Raccoons presented a surprisingly harsh view of environmental neglect and human greed, making it a cartoon that would likely be pulled from air under today's cautious standards. Number 6. Dungeons & Dragons, 1983. Dungeons & Dragons remains iconic, yet controversial, featuring dark fantasy, intense danger, and emotional stakes far beyond what typical children's shows deliver today. The series followed 6 kids, transported into a perilous realm filled with monsters, curses, and life-threatening challenges. Almost every episode placed the heroes in mortal danger, creating tension that would violate modern broadcast guidelines. The villain Venger embodied pure terror, with a design and presence that frightened young viewers across the 80s. The show included undead creatures, demon-like enemies, and shadowy sorcery, considered far too frightening by today's standards. Some episodes featured scenes of despair or themes involving sacrifice, loss, and moral ambiguity. The darkest element involved the constant possibility that the children might never return home, a looming emotional weight rarely explored in modern children's programming. Several banned or unaired episodes dealt with death or self-sacrifice, including the infamous episode where a character considers extreme actions during overwhelming danger. Despite its brilliance, Dungeons & Dragons pushed into territory that networks now avoid entirely. Its fantasy violence, frightening creatures, and emotional power would get it pulled from air instantly. Number 5. Mr. T. 1983. Mr. T delivered non-stop danger grit and street-level realism that modern children's networks would never approve. The show followed a traveling gymnastics team coached by Mr. T as they stumbled into crime rings, kidnappings, urban violence, and conspiracies in every episode. The threats were grounded and often frightening, showing children directly confronting criminals, weapon-wielding thugs, and dangerous adults. Many episodes presented life or death stakes, such as fires, collapsing buildings, and high-speed chases. The moral lessons were clear, but the surrounding tension remained intense throughout. Scenes showing kids escaping gunfire or rescuing victims from real-world disasters would be removed instantly, under today's broadcast guidelines, which avoid putting children next to realistic violence. The show also featured heavy emotional conflict. Characters wrestled with fear, trauma, and betrayal, reflecting issues far beyond the soft tone expected from current animated adventures. Additionally, Mr. S' tough love approach, though iconic, would now be labeled too aggressive for younger audiences. While beloved for its action and memorable heroics, Mr. T carried an edge and seriousness unmatched by modern cartoons. For its gritty realism, emotional weight, and dangerous situations, this series would be pulled from air today without hesitation. Number 4. Kid Video, 1984. Kid Video was a neon explosion of live-action musical energy, but its narrative leaned into surreal danger that would raise alarms today. The plot followed a real-world teenage band, kidnapped and taken into a strange alternate dimension, ruled by the villainous Master Blaster. Themes of abduction, forced labor, and control are central to the premise, making it unsuitable for modern audiences. Episodes routinely depicted the teens escaping imprisonment, confronting monstrous minions, and navigating warped nightmare-like landscapes. The imagery ranged from bizarre to deeply unsettling, portraying liminal dream states and distorted reality in ways that would frighten younger viewers. Scenes where characters faced psychological manipulation or magical imprisonment would also violate today's child safety guidelines. Even the music-driven sequences could feel chaotic or tense, reflecting emotional confusion, not typically allowed in current children's programming. Modern networks avoid anything involving teens in distress, especially scenarios implying captivity or coercion. Kid Video remains a fascinating creative experiment that mixed music, surrealism, and adventure. Yet its core themes and unsettling visuals guarantee that it would be pulled off air today for pushing far past accepted boundaries. Number 3. Rubik, the Amazing Cube, 1983. Rubik the Amazing Cube told the story of a magical sentient puzzle creature who granted powers to the young Rodriguez siblings. Though marketed as whimsical, the show frequently veered into intense danger. Villains constantly chased the children, hoping to steal Rubik for personal gain, creating non-stop tension and repeated abduction attempts. This persistent threat toward minors would break modern broadcast standards immediately. Episodes included supernatural antagonists, curses, and high-stakes magic spiraling out of control. Scenes where children were trapped, endangered, or magically transformed created emotional distress networks, now avoid. Rubik himself could disassemble or reshape his face into unsettling expressions, not suitable for today's sensitive guidelines. Additionally, the children faced criminals, mystical creatures, and environmental hazards far beyond what modern animated series allow. Emotional stakes were often high, with characters crying, panicking, or fearing the loss of Rubik. Although remembered fondly, Rubik the Amazing Cube mixed fantasy charm with serious danger. That contrast would be unacceptable under current safety rules, making the show one that would definitely be pulled from air today. Number 2. The Gary Coleman Show, 1982. The Gary Coleman Show centered on a boy who dies, becomes an angel, and is sent back to Earth to help people. This premise alone guarantees instant removal from modern children's programming. Themes involving death, the afterlife, and angelic intervention are considered too spiritually heavy and potentially controversial for networks to approve today. Each episode involved supernatural moral tests, often placing Gary into emotionally difficult dilemmas, dealing with guilt, justice, temptation, or regret. Some storylines depicted dark consequences for misbehavior or featured characters facing fear, sadness, or personal failure. Modern guidelines discourage any direct reference to death or religious imagery in youth animation. The antagonist Hornswoggle, a mischievous winged creature, routinely manipulated events, often causing chaos that forced Gary to confront complex ethical choices. Scenes depicting spiritual danger or punishment would absolutely be blocked from airing in current children's blocks. Despite its good intentions, The Gary Coleman Show explored heavy emotional territory, wrapped in supernatural themes. With its afterlife foundation and morally intense plots, this cartoon would be pulled off air today instantly. Number 1. Turbo Teen, 1984. Turbo Teen remains one of the most infamous 80s cartoons, due to its surreal and unsettling premise. The story followed Brett Matthews, a teenager, who transforms into a sports car whenever he gets hot. This transformation sequence featured stretching limbs, melting facial features, and biomechanical shifts that many viewers found disturbing. Under current guidelines, such body horror imagery would be banned outright. Episodes often placed Brett in terrifying danger, including high-speed chases, criminal attacks, fires, and kidnappings. Because Brett could involuntarily transform whenever overheated, he frequently lost control of his own body, creating anxiety-driven scenarios that modern networks would deem emotionally harmful for young audiences. The show also implied disturbing scientific experimentation, since Brett's condition resulted from a government laboratory accident. This theme, combined with mutation-like visuals, would violate today's standards. Villains pursued Brett to exploit his condition, introducing constant threats of exploitation or capture. Turbo Teen is remembered for its creativity, but also its deeply strange tone. Its intense transformations, frightening chases, and bodily distortion ensure it would be the first cartoon removed from air today. The 80s dared to push boundaries in ways unimaginable now. These forgotten cartoons blended danger, fear, surrealism, and emotional weight that children's programming would never allow today. Yet they also shaped a generation with bold storytelling and unforgettable imagery. Their legacy lives on, reminding us how fearless 80s animation truly was.